that was an emotional movie.
Yeah, well, go ahead.
My name's Chris Hopkins. How are you? I'd like to take the time to thank Heather and the rest of the Council on Aging for having us here today, for allowing us to do this. We need to learn more
Close to the microphone.
about Alzheimer's and aging. I'm tall. That's okay. And, you know, it's no longer the big secret. For years, it was the big secret. The last few years of my father's life, he'd come in and out of, going in and out of dementia. And I can remember two specific instances where one of them is kind of funny. My father had surgery, he had to go to rehab right down the street from where they lived. And so he says to me he's in rehab, he said to me one day, he said, Chris, just, you know, if you bring my car over here, I can go and do errands and stuff during the day. You know, I can take care of all that stuff. And my response was, yeah, no, Dad, no problem, I'll have it here tomorrow. And my mother, who was kind of emotional, started going, Chris, what are you, you can't do that, John, what are you thinking? And I escorted my mother out of the room, and I said, Mom, he's not going to remember this tomorrow. He's not going to remember this in a couple hours, so why argue with him? And the second one that sticks really in my mind was the last couple of days of his life. He was in the hospital, and he really had dementia. He didn't know who anybody was. And I think it was the day he died. It was earlier in the day, and the nurse came in to do her nurse thing. Fluffed the pillows, changed the sheets, whatever the case may be. And she said to him, and I was sitting in a chair, and she said to him, do you know who that is? And he didn't have the glasses on, so he squinted. And a big smile came across his face, and he said, that's my boy. And 15 seconds later, he was back in dementia. But I really feel that was a gift from God, that the last day of his life, my father knew I was there with him. You noticed a few of the people in the movie. A couple to note. The physician from Harvard and Mass General, Dr. Tanzi, he is the person that wrote the song that ended that way, that the movie ended. I get a little jealous because God gave him a lot of talent. Because he has his side job, if you can believe it, is he is the studio keyboardist for Aerosmith. That's his side job, is to be a rock and roll star with them. Not a bad deal. And the other person to note is you all saw Greg's son, Connor, who's in the film. Connor passed away last July 7th, and I just wanted to bring that up before Greg spoke. So it's been a rough year, and but Connor was his right hand, and I've known Greg for 25 years. We started working together at a company 25 years ago. He was my mentor. To know Greg, you know he's a man of faith and character. Because of him, I've become passionate about Alzheimer's and knowledgeable about it and caring about it. And thank you all for coming here today, because we're here to learn about Greg, to learn about this disease, to learn from Greg, to learn about ourselves, and to follow his lead. Over the years, I've become in awe of him. Most people, when they get this diagnosed, would put Greg doubled down and said, damn it, we're going to talk about it. As he said in the movie. He speaks across the country over the years, coast to coast. Last Wednesday, he spoke. I have to read this because I can't pronounce this stuff that you wrote down. The International Conference of Biogen Researchers from around the world. He asked them to speak at that conference. So without further delay, I would like to introduce my dear friend, and a person who whenever I talk about him, I refer to him as the most courageous person I've ever met in my life, and I truly believe that. Is Greg O'Brien.
Chris, I think you have dementia. I want to dedicate this to my son Connor. no parent should have to bury a child. He had grand mal seizures, and I was there for about 10 of them. And the last one, July 10th, brought him home. But in my faith, I know he's in heaven, he's with the Lord, he's free of his struggles. And he used to, and he did an incredible job speaking. A lot of times we speak to 500 or 1,000 people, and someone would ask me a question that I thought Connor could answer better, and I would say, hey Connor, he was 34 when he passed away, and I said, hey Connor, why don't you come up and talk? And he would come up and have the audience in the palm of his hand. And we were once, I serve on the board of Us Against Alzheimer's, and also advocate for the Cure Alzheimer's Fund of Boston. And we were down in Washington at a Us Against Alzheimer's event with a lot of congressmen and senators and stuff. And Connor was on a panel talking to everyone. The room was filled, and they said, what's your job description? And just like that, he goes, my job description is to make sure my dad doesn't lose his shit. Now, I dropped that bomb, so I'm not going to drop anymore. I've said shit a few times.
There's a young man standing behind you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. We covered a lot of ground in the film, so I'm going to be, a little on the brief side and then open it up to questions. But in the old days, I could talk. God gifted me with writing and speaking, and the doctors have said that's the last thing that will go. I used to be able to speak for like an hour without notes, and I can't, so I have to read this. So I hope it's all right with you. I always say I'm reminded of the old Irish priest who once said, "As unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, let me just say a few thousand words." But I'll have to read a few thousand words. So, Alzheimer's, as you probably get a good sense, has been around for a long, long time. Maybe even going back to the Garden of Eden. What was Adam thinking? About 2,400 years ago, Plato described an illness that, quote, gives rise to all manner of forgetfulness as well as stupidity. About 2,000 years ago, the Roman poet Juvenal characterized the phenomenon, quote, worse than any loss in the body is the failing of the mind, which forgets names and cannot recognize the face of old friends who dined with him last night, nor those of the children whom he has begotten and brought up. In ancient Egypt, a scribe wrote of a close associate, every night becomes more and more childish. Scripture unwittingly may have put an exclamation point on Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia in the Gospel of John. Quote, John 21:18, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and walked everywhere you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and carry you to places you do not want to go. I want to talk a little bit today about the stereotypes of Alzheimer's that just are not true. I want to talk about the fight 24/7 to stay in the moment, which you saw in the film. I want to talk, most importantly, about living with Alzheimer's, not dying with it. It's a disease that the doctors, the experts say, can take 20 to 25 years to run its course. And the person who says, you don't get Alzheimer's, by the way, on the day you're diagnosed, just like I didn't get prostate cancer on the day I was diagnosed. And the person who says, well, my mother or my father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and they died 7 years later, there are exceptions to everything. The reality of that is that individual, the mother or the father, probably suffered silently for 10 or 15 years because they were afraid of the taboo. And that's really the journey. I got an early diagnosis because of that bike accident I had. What the doctors, as we said in the film, said that the accident unleashed a monster in the making. And I wasn't able to multitask. I wasn't able to do the kinds of things that I needed to do as my job as a journalist. And so I went to my doctor and I had clinical tests and SPECT scans and brain scans and all that ended up with a diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's. As I think you know, my maternal grandfather died of Alzheimer's, my mother died of Alzheimer's, my paternal uncle died of Alzheimer's, and before my father's death, who had a lot of medical disabilities, he too was diagnosed with dementia. And you know, words can hurt, and one of those words that can hurt is the word dementia. I'd like to find the person who came up with that name, because it sounds like a demon shouting in the wilderness. And also, what I want to say is, while Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia, a lot of the other forms of dementia are similar in so many ways. And we need to, I mean, Alzheimer's, because of it's the kind of dementia that affects more people than anything else, often gets the most publicity. But I like to speak on behalf of all dementias, and I talk about my journey in a dementia, and I'm hoping and praying that the doctors, in addition to Alzheimer's, work on that and find cures or ways to stop progressions for all dementias. You know, as an investigative reporter now in struggling with dementia, it's a 24/7 fight to stay in the moment. I've often said that lying down in wrestling is a position of defeat. And because of all this with my family, I want to fight, because I want to fight for my children, your grandchildren, my grandchildren. And my mom, close before she died, said to me, "Greg, you got to write about this. You need to write about it." So my mother is a hero of my life, and I wrote about it for her. Like I said before, Alzheimer's is not your grandfather's disease, although my grandfather died of it. And the stereotypes are just wrong. The doctors will tell you that there are no two types of Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia that are the same. They're like snowflakes. They're all different. And I think that that's important for people to know, because as my friend who is the founder of Us Against Alzheimer's, George Bradenberg, said that most doctors, they're exceptions to the rules, don't know bupkis about this disease, okay? And you're the nurse and you know, and so they like to come up with answers, and there is no answer, because you're talking about a disease that affects people differently. And as the doctors told me, I have, this is what my mom taught me: when your brain fails, and you heard me mention it in the film, write and speak from your heart, which is the place of the soul. And I'm not here to proselytize, but you know, I have an imperfect faith as an Irish Catholic, and I go to an evangelical church now, but it's the place of the heart is the soul. And you know, maybe my mom taught me that the mind is not all that it's cracked up to be. And at the end, just think about it. If you believe that, you know, when you're dead, you're around still in a different venue, that it is this part, the heart and the soul, that survives. And so if you can learn at a young age, as I did with my mom, to write and speak from the soul, it's pretty good. And there are times, and I said I'm an imperfect guy, and you heard me drop that bomb, so I know I got to clean up my act. But it's important in writing. There are times when I write, and I'm writing from the soul, and I feel like I'm in the zone. You know, in sports, when they talk about in the zone, and I'll look down at my laptop and say, where did that come from? I'm not that good. And so I give the Lord the credit. So But I'm glad that you're here today. It's very important because we need to talk about Alzheimer's as a community and fully understand it. And it's getting a lot of publicity now, but it's going to take a long, long time for us to come up with a cure. And what does cure look like? Okay, I cut up a frog in high school, so what do I know about medicine? But those people on the dementia journey, the train has left. There's no, and Rudy Tanzi would agree with this, that there's no magic wand. But if we can find a way to slow the progression so you don't come up with, and the shield thing, that's very important. I can't remember what it stands for, but it's very important. You guys are smarter. So, but if we can take care of our minds and our bodies, and they come up with medication that can put off a progression for years and years, we'll save millions of people. And I think in the end that that's what cure might look like. You heard I had the statistics about how many people have Alzheimer's, but you heard that in the film. The film kind of took away half my speech, but it's good because we'll get through this, all right? As I try to tell people that it's not my story, it's your story. And it's a story about you or a loved one. And chances are that you will know someone with dementia, you may get dementia, there may be someone in your family, but it's important to understand that it could be your story someday. See, I'm going through this pretty quickly, folks. This is good. I'll never forget, this is important. When I was in the neurologist, after all the tests, I went through a battery of tests, including clinical tests and all that, which confirmed the diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's / dementia, whatever you want to call it. And I was sitting there, and the doctor, my neurologist, was talking to me and basically saying, you need to take this serious. I think my family doctor, who just passed away recently from cancer, I think he told the neurologist, you got to whack Greg between the ears because you got to get his attention. And so he, I'm sitting there, and he's going through the diagnosis, and I knew from watching my mother. I had when I was a young boy, I saw my grandfather and my uncle. And so I saw the same things that were going on with me. And so the diagnosis was no surprise. I was kind of relieved because if you're going to fight an enemy, you need to study the enemy and know who the enemy is. And but I remember when the doctor was delivering the diagnosis, my wife and I were sitting next to each other, and I grabbed her hand. And the first thing I said was, "What about the kids?" And just to repeat what I had said before, it's all about the kids. It's about our kids and our grandkids, and that's why it's so important. Today, as I tell people, I can still speak, but it kind of kicks the crap. I was going to say shit out of me, but I can't, so I won't. But I know this guy over here is getting very nervous. The cable guy, he's going like this. Turn it off. But 60% of my short-term memory can be gone in 30 seconds. I don't recognize people I've known all my life. If you put me in a room and I don't expect to see certain people there, 70% I won't remember their names. And I hate cliches, but it takes a village, and they'll come up and say, "Greg, it's John. Greg, it's Mary." And I appreciate that. I have a loss of place and a loss of self, loss of filter. I see things that aren't there, as you heard in the film. And it also affects your body too, as well as your brain, because the brain sends signals, and when those signals aren't, you're shaking your heads, when those signals aren't going down, other things in your body start shutting down. Recently, which wasn't mentioned in the film, I had major spine surgery, reconstruction of my spine, because my spine was deteriorating, and it was a result of neuropathy, but also brain signals not going down, and it was Supposed to be a 5-hour operation at New England Baptist. It was a 10-hour operation. And they cut me from the bottom of my neck to the top of my butt, 54 staples, and plates and screws and steel rods. And on the table itself, the doctor had said that, you know, I started showing some signs of a heart attack. And so do you believe in God? I'm still here. I will tell you another funny thing. So, I'm sure a lot of people here have had operations, but when you're under anesthesia for 10 hours, and you have Alzheimer's or dementia, it takes a long time to come back. So I was totally out of it. So the nurse comes in, beautiful young nurse, and in my hallucination or whatever state, I said, I want to go home. And she said, what? I said, I want to go home. Mr. O'Brien, you can't go home, you have to stay here. And I said, no, you don't understand. I want to go home to heaven. Can you give me a pill? And she said, what? And I said it again. And she said, with all due respect, Mr. O'Brien, if you say that one more time, we're going to have someone come in on suicide watch 24/7 and be there. So I said, okay. Well then, can I compromise? You're out of your mind. And she goes, what? I said, can I compromise? What are you talking about? And I said, can my wife bring in a little plastic jar of apple juice, AKA Chardonnay, and you look the other way? So she said, yes, but no pill. That takes care of that. Let me just kind of go through. You know, Alzheimer's is indeed a sickness that runs in circles and eventually meanders for an ultimate kill. It's analogous to the prototypical arcade game Pac-Man, where a pie-faced yellow icon navigates a maze of challenges eating Pac-Dots to get to the next level. While the iconic video game was designed to have no ending, there are no power pellets in Alzheimer's to consume the enemies of ghosts, goblins, and monsters as my Pac-Man in slow motion consumes brain cells one by one. Game over. Not always, if you're willing to fight with the help of individuals. We've learned legions from the words of others. Poet Robert Frost observed in 3 words, which you heard in the film, I can sum up everything I've learned in life. It goes on. Woody Allen, in a wry exchange in the movie Annie Hall, put an exclamation point on survival instincts in an anecdote about a guy who goes to a psychiatrist complaining that his brother thinks he's a chicken. When the doctor suggests he turn to his brother and tell him not, he goes, I would. His brother said, but I need the eggs. You know, the Irish say, never get mad, get even, and I'm getting even with Alzheimer's. Not for me, the train is left, but for you, your children and grandchildren, for a generation of baby boomers and loved ones who face this demon prowling like Abaddon. God bless you. I'll answer questions. I know it was kind of a little off at times. Just to let you know that there 2 or 3 times I lost my train of thought, and that just happens, and I apologize if it seemed a little...
Didn't notice it.
No, all right, well, good.
You did a great job.
Good. Any questions at all? No math.
Are you still riding your bike?
Yeah, I am. But with a helmet. I'm not allowed to drive. And I'll tell you how Alzheimer's affects the mind. There was a time when I was driving years ago, but the doctors took my license from me, and I would be on familiar roads, on Cape Cod country roads, and I wouldn't remember where I was. And one time I came up to a somewhat busy intersection, and I saw this sign. It was red with white border, and I didn't know what it said, what it was, and my mind told me to drive through it. It was a stop sign. And through the grace of God, I I didn't hit anything, but it was close, which in my heart says you shouldn't be driving. And shortly after that, I'm on Route 6A in Brewster, and there was a young woman crossing the road with her bike in a crosswalk, and I'm looking straight at her, and I didn't see it, and I, thank God, moments before I got too close, I realized there was a woman, but my brain wouldn't tell me that. There's another time when I could drive, I drove a yellow Jeep, four-door Jeep, you can't miss it. And I don't know what it's like here, but on Cape Cod, we got to take our garbage to the dump. I don't know, do you have pickup here? Okay, well, you're more sophisticated than me. But I have to tell you, going to the dump is kind of cool. You see people, when they're running for office, you know, they go down and they talk. I often think they should put a sports bar there. So, you know, you throw your garbage away and then they have a few beers. But I threw my trash away and one day, and I said, okay, how do I get home? And I said, well, I could call my wife or call one of my sons or my daughter, or I could get someone from here to drive me. And my brain would not tell me that yellow four-door Jeep Wrangler was my car. And it took a while to figure it out, because I was talking to people and they're looking at me like the nut I am, and they said, Greg, the freaking car's right there. So
But you gotta look on the bright side, you can still drive perfectly in Manhattan right now.
yeah, yeah. I take a lot of Ubers, so. But any other questions?
Well, thank you very much for the whole presentation, but I really appreciate that you took the time in the film, and again, you mentioned it, the shield, because we're part of a study, but they never asked us about our diet. They never asked us the quantity of our exercise, or they asked about socialization, but those other things are very, very important. To keep learning is very, very important. So I really appreciate that you took the time to say that.
Well,
prevention. Thank you.
Just to learn more about it, Google Dr. Rudy Tanzi, T-A-N-Z-I. He's another hero of my life. We're good friends. And Google Dr. Rudy Tanzi, Cure Alzheimer's Fund, Shield. And you'll probably get to the homepage of the Cure Alzheimer's Fund, and there's a lot of information about Shield. And there's something on Us Against Alzheimer's, where I serve on the board. It's usvsalz.com, I think. But what you do, I don't remember. I'm probably wrong on that. Put in US, Us Against Alzheimer's, and you'll come up with a website. But there's a whole section on brain health. So I would encourage all of you, because you never know what's going to happen, you know? And I said before, maybe that's what cure looks like. It's medication that can slow down the progression, but also living a healthy lifestyle, you know? Any other questions?
I have a question. You hear people of all ages saying, I forget what I'm doing, I'm going into the room, forgot what I was there. I don't know if we're in denial, because we're saying, oh, everybody's like that. What's your opinion?
Well, I think that's a good question. There's a difference between forgetting where your car keys are and not realizing you have a car. Getting back to the dump thing. But the other thing to slow progressions, because it's a 20 to 25 year course that this journey can be. And I got my diagnosis probably 10 years before I would have. Because of, yeah, and so I would have these last 10 years, probably right now, I'd be going for a diagnosis and they say, oh geez, poor Greg has Alzheimer's. Well, poor Greg had it, 10 years before that. And, I could still have another 10 years on this journey. My mom is a perfect example of me. She was bright, she was smart, and she fought it, It's part of what they call cognitive reserve. And you will know this, I wrote it down here, there's something called neuroplasticity. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's the brain's ability not with everyone, if you've trained your brain, to find ways of connecting with different synapses when A and B doesn't work. And I've been blessed with that, but it's starting to all go away, but that's okay. Did I answer your question? Oh, I know what else I wanted to say. Have we met before? That's a joke. Yeah, Dan, pleased to meet you. What I would say is read up on all this brain health stuff, Us Against Alzheimer's, the Cure Alzheimer's Fund. But if you have concerns, go get a clinical test. And you know, one of my best friends was my family doctor. Family doctors should not be giving those tests. You go to an expert and clinical tests. There are groups that they do that, like in Boston and elsewhere, they do it professionally. And that will tell you if there's a problem with your cognition. And I totally flunked this test. What they do is they tell you 3 things and remember it. I got a 0, you know, but how I was able to get through, my inner personality is such that I override that by just being this jovial guy when I'm not really, because I don't want people to know. And I don't want people to feel sorry for me, because if they feel sorry for me, they're not going to listen to what I said. And I try in this disease to look as good as I can, and I'm smart because God gave me a good IQ like my parents. And some people, I'll end with this, but it is kind of funny. But I get so tired of it when people say, "Oh, you look so good." I go, "Let me just tell you something. You're doing a drive-by, and I'll tell you this: I'll look better in a coffin than you do now." God bless.